You read the session description, which I think says it very nicely. It gives a good description of what the DCs stand about, dynamic coalitions. They are self-constituted bottom-up entities within the IGF ecosystem. They started right at the beginning at the first IGF in Athens in 2006. In those days, there were sort of two schools of thought. There were those mainly from civil society who wanted to create a new organization with many working groups. Then others said, no, this is just an annual meeting. Then one member of the then multi-stakeholder advisory group said, let's see, maybe they just emerge as dynamic coalitions of like-minded people. And they did indeed. So ever since 2006, we have dynamic coalitions. There are people who are interested in one issue. By now, we have 32 of them. And it's quite interesting when you look at the very list of dynamic coalitions that we have. They range from very broad issues, such as one of my colleagues here is about children's rights on the internet, which is a very topical issue. Another colleague deals with emerging technologies, again, very interesting and very much in the news. And the other colleague who helps to sort this out with the technology deals with accessibility for people with disabilities. So you see it's a very, very broad range of issues, and the session descriptions describes them rightly as open, vital incubators of innovation, and called them engines of innovation, dialogue on community-driven research on some of the most pressing issues in internet governance, and they are tackling the most pressing challenges at the intersection of technology, security, and governance. And right now, I think, as I said, we have 32 dynamic coalitions. And the good news is for the dynamic coalitions, we are actually mentioned in the drafts, which are for the WSIS plus 20 outcome documents. The very first draft did not mention the dynamic coalitions, but now we are mentioned, and we hope it'll be then also when we actually have the final outcome document. Now, there are a few changes to the program. We have in writing, some people could not make it. Unfortunately, Vince, one of the chair of the leadership panel and one of the co-inventors of the underlying protocol of the internet, that is TCP/IP, could not make it. Also, Wout Denatvis could not make it, but he is replaced by Mark Cavell. And in addition, we have Jutta Kroll here. She is my co-facilitator of the dynamic coalitions. And I should have started with introducing who I am. I'm Markus Gummer. I'm the other co-facilitator of the dynamic coalitions coordination group. But with that, without further ado, I would like to get the session started. And the first speaker is our co-host, Dino Dericcio, who also works for the United Nations. And he deals with emerging technologies. Please, Dino, you have the word.
Thank you very much, Markus, and pleased to be here. Apologies for, I think there is some connectivity issue. I'm not sure whether you can all see the video, but hopefully you will be able to hear the audio. Thanks, Markus, for the introduction. My name is Dino Dericcio, and indeed, I am both a UN staff member. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of the United Nations Pension Fund based in New York. I've been in the United Nations for 25 years. Most of my career was in oversight. I was the chief of IT auditor for many years. In 2017, I joined the UN Pension Fund first as a chief information officer, CIO, and recently appointed deputy chief executive officer. In addition to that, 6 years ago, I joined the Internet Governance Forum because I wanted to share and collaborate some of the innovative projects that we have implemented at the UN Pension Fund. And in the spirit, on the multi-stakeholder approach of the IGF, I found, I believe, the best environment to collaborate, to share, and of course, most importantly, to learn from other colleagues, because the multi-stakeholder gives us the approach and the ability to interact with other entities, whether they are member states, whether they are private sector, non-government organization, academia, technical community, and so on. As I started to participate and collaborate in the activities of the IGF, I also started to take some more active roles. And specifically, I became the co-leader of one of the 32 dynamic coalition that Marcus alluded to, the Dynamic Coalition on Blockchain Assurance and Standardization, because indeed, the innovative solution that I architected at the UN Pension Fund went live in 2021 is a digital identity solution for proof of life for the 70,000 beneficiary retirees of the United Nations that reside across the globe in more than 192 countries. And this solution makes use of blockchain, biometrics, facial recognition, artificial intelligence, and geolocalization. And as a former auditor, one of the main concern that I always had was not only to use innovative technology, but also how to provide assurance to our governing bodies and to our stakeholders at large on the use, on the responsible and ethical use and secure use of these technologies. And as a complementing activity of that, I then became the co-leader of another dynamic coalition on emerging technology, because I felt that, as I alluded to before, emerging technology, of course, are not only represented by one technology, but primarily right now by a convergence of more than one technology, specifically AI, with blockchain, with also from quantum. Quantum is also now becoming and attracting a lot of attention. So again, with my background of a former auditor, I started to address the question, how can we, at the international level, we can demonstrate that indeed we are using this technology in a secure way, in a trustworthy way, in a responsible and ethical way. So as part of this, one of the now most recent updates to all of this innovative activity that we have been conducting at the UN is the fact that we identified that indeed in our specific case, very concrete case, we face a digital divide issue. After going live with this digital identity solution 2021, in 2023, we identified that some of our clients in certain parts of the world either did not have the ability to own one of these modern smartphones, hence they could not access, they could not use the technology that we had put together, or they were residing in areas of the world where the communication infrastructure was not suitable for them to access the technology. So as you can appreciate in the UN and within the context of the Internet Governance Forum principles and values, a digital divide is a big issue. And so we found an option. We just launched a partnership with the UNDP, where through the presence of UNDP across the globe, I believe they have 170 offices, we partnered with them and we installed Kiosk, basically the iPad version of this in their field offices, where those clients, those UN pension fund retirees and beneficiaries that reside in those areas of the world where either they don't have the ability to own one of these phones or they don't have the ability to connect to the infrastructure, they can visit the local UNDP office, use the kiosk, and still participate and benefit from this technology that allows them to confirm that indeed they're still alive. So this is not really, I just want to conclude by saying this. This is not just a bureaucratic check the box, because when and if a US retiree cannot confirm that they're still alive, by the end of the fiscal year, the UN Pension Fund is obliged by rules and regulation to suspend the payment. And that suspension has an effect also on their health insurance, on the ASHE. They cannot benefit from the health insurance. So really here is about achieving SDG 4 related to legal identity, the 16.9 the target of ensuring legal identity to all, but also SDG 3 about good well-being and good health. So we really wanted to demonstrate a true partnership amongst entity, in this case of the UN, but also outside the UN, through the use of emerging technology, we can indeed achieve in practical and tangible manner the SDG goals. So I'm looking forward today to collaborate and to share with the representative of the other dynamic coalition and also hear from the audience whether there are any specific questions to demonstrate how together we can advance the goal of the IGF, the Global Digital Compact, the Sustainable Development Goals, and ultimate the vision of the Secretary General that he documented in 2018 in his strategy on new technologies and the common agenda. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Dino. That was a very vivid description of how the dynamic coalitions actually work. And also, it is our common belief that we have something to offer in the implementation of all the outcomes we're talking about, the Global Digital Compact, and obviously also the WSIS Plus 20. Now, the next speaker is Rajendra Gupta. He's a leader of Dynamic Coalition on Digital Health, but he has also organized some webinars that looked at a very broad spectrum of our activities. And without any further ado, please, Rajendra, over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Yuta, our co-facilitators, our wonderful secretariat, including our friend Roman, who couldn't join us today but is in Geneva, and Dino, the co-organizer of this meeting. I think we are here because of our work. And dynamic coalitions, to my experience over the last couple of years, are dynamic by nature of their culture and structure. We are multi-stakeholder in our approach when we form a dynamic coalition. I had the great fortune and opportunity to lead 3 dynamic coalition on digital economy, digital health, and environment. And I was looking at, when I come here, what kind of contributions we have made. As I see that these is literally are the intellectual bank for the IGF community, and I was just looking at the reports, and I could lay hands over 11 reports that we produced over the years. So on sustainable automation, urbanization, biodiversity, and mental health, the role of academia, industry, communities, and technology. Project Create, where Marcus was with me in Ethiopia on the dais when we launched Internet for All, Livelihood for All. How do we create jobs using internet technologies? We do annual survey, I was saying 2020 report of Internet and Jobs by Dynamic Coalition of Digital Economy. Then Achieving Internet for All and Livelihood for All. State of Digital Health 2024. I think there is probably you could have done around 20 reports. Internet as a global equalizer, a call for action for global political leadership. Environment as economy and economy as environment, given the fact that whatever we do today, even we are connected digitally, we have a carbon footprint. This also is responsible internet usage. I remember Dino was in our room when we launched this report. And of course, 2021 report of Internet and Jobs, then 2022 report. But this is not enough. It's not just about producing reports. It's about sharing the status of what's going on. And every report has an action item for the political leadership of various parts of the world, like what kind of things they can do. This year, I was also given the option to lead the webinar initiative, which was a fantastic experience, and also our outreach increased. We had in some of the webinars around 200 plus people joining us. And I remember the first one was on global AI governance for humanity's benefit on 3rd April. We had security in the digital age on 30th April. Capacity building in digital age 22nd May. Future of multi-stakeholder governance on 22nd June. Gaming and gaming verification, cross-sector applications and impact on 24th July. Quantum computing and how it will affect you, 14th October. And this is not the end. We are looking at next year to host an important webinar, getting global leaders to help cities which have a very bad air quality index, AQI. We also wish to do on digital health, how it will impact us, how it will improve health systems. And again, put forth our agenda on creating jobs using technology. It has been a great experience working with Dynamic Coalition and collaborating with others under wonderful leadership of the IGF Secretariat. And I think as dynamic coalitions, we get an opportunity to focus on topical issues, do the thought leadership, and also suggest actions for policymakers. And it has been a real pleasure to be with the dynamic coalition. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. The next speaker is supposed to be online, but I can't see her online. But we have Amado here in the room. So, Amado, And you please then talk on behalf of your dynamic coalition, which is a clear link to the one that Rajendra just has spoken to, that is the health. Please, Amado.
Thank you very much, the chair. My name is Amado Espinosa. I represent the Digital Coalition for Digital Health or data-driven health organizations. And the purpose for us to be here is also to relax a little bit more, especially we foresee at the healthcare sector. And certainly new technologies, as already mentioned, in the healthcare sector are very key. In IGF, it's concerned about how to approach the healthcare sector in order to take advantage of it. We have different collaborations with WHO and with the different partners of those kind of organizations in order to deploy the new technologies like quantum computing, for example, and how these kind of technologies can be equipped by the different research groups in which they will be certainly close related to this field. And we are also working very close together with another innovators where the Internet of Medical Things and the merging of the artificial intelligence in the healthcare sector will take place in order for us to reshape the way how the healthcare systems work nowadays. Our main concern is actually to give fairness and rights for all the people in order to have access to this kind of technologies. And we certainly follow up all the initiative from the GDC and from the Millennium Goals, which we are certainly following up and looking for how to enrich the participations of the different researchers and members of the civil society who collaborate with us in this position. Then I invite you to learn a little bit more about how we deal with all these issues and how can we collaborate all together in order for us to build up this digital future which we are working for. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amado. We can move over then just to the next speaker, and that is Judith, please.
Hi, this is Judith Hellerstein. Just checking we could hear me. Yes. Oh, great. So my name is Judith Hellerstein, and today I was speaking as one of the two coordinators of the IGF Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, otherwise known as DCAD. The position of DCAD is that despite these last 20 years of advocacy, the digital divide among persons with disabilities is only mentioned tangentially throughout the WSIS plus 20. If WSIS plus 20 is to actually fulfill its premise of being a people-centered, inclusive, and development-oriented information society, disability inclusion must move from the footnotes to the main agenda. By that I mean persons with disabilities are one of the largest minorities, but unfortunately when it comes to their participation in IGF events and other internet governance discussions, their number is extremely small. What does this mean? It means that in the 20 years of IGF discussions, although every IGF has had sessions and discussions on persons with disabilities, few persons with actual lived disabilities participate in these discussions, and even fewer actually come in person. DCAD has been working to change this. Our Disability Fellows Program, made possible through our generous donations by Google and VinServ, allow us to bring persons with disability to the IGF. We also provide them with a mentor and with leadership training and other courses on internet governance. In this way, we are providing an on-ramp to persons with disabilities to meaningfully participate in the IGF and to bring their knowledge and training back to their own communities. Our hope is that these experiences will then enable these leaders to become leaders in their own community, to join within their country's multi-stakeholder advisory groups, and also be chosen on one of any of the additional multi-sector advisory boards like the UN, the ITU, and other state-sponsored groups are setting up. It is wonderful that many of the versions of the outcome documents and resolutions and other statements are mentioning the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability and the desire for all things to be accessible. But we need also to ensure the implementation or requirements of accessibility standards and guidelines on the adoption and enforcement of the international accessibility standards, most notably like the World Wide Web accessibility initiatives. So I pose this other question: are we building the capacities in the right manner? Is there something else we can do? One way we can move this forward is to ensure that all the leadership groups within the internet governance space contain persons with lived disabilities. We also need to change the mindset, not just of people coming to the internet governance events, but also of the organizers of these events, so that they will have accessible meetings. We need to increase the awareness of everyone involved in producing the knowledge in a way that is made accessible for persons to access the knowledge when they access it in a different manner. We should commit to ensuring that any and all interventions and capacity building and training are made, bring to the forefront local content and languages that are made accessible, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of persons with disabilities. And they also adhere to accessibility standards and assistive technology compatibility. For the past 20 years, we have built a digital world that has systemically excluded 1.5 billion people. The digital divide is not only about the rural connectivity or 4G access. It is about the millions of uncaptioned videos, unnavigable websites, inaccessible apps, and inaccessible documents that define the online experience for users. One example is sometimes staff, in all their meaningful way, want to make documents prettier, so they hire a design firm, but then inadvertently forget to tell the design firm that we need it to be accessible. And so sometimes documents that will have been accessible become no longer accessible because the graphics and the images are not using appropriate alt text or descriptions. So we need to keep raising the awareness of all staff and participants at IGF events on how to create these documents, how to create accessible meetings. In that vein, DCAG in 2024 significantly revised the IGF accessibility guidelines. And then we updated them last year. We also have published these guidelines in different languages. So we have in Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Dutch, Bosnian, and we hope to add a few more languages shortly. Each year, we also update the guidelines based on experiences that our members and other DCAT fellows have at the conferences. So it can make these guidelines more dynamic. And then it goes a long way to showing how we make further improvements. DCAT has also joined other intersectional groups within the IGF, such as the different policy networks, best practice forums, and the NOIs, to educate these groups and others on the importance of integrating persons with lived disabilities into leadership and ensuring that all programs are accessible and inclusive to all. However, in the end, it comes down to these questions that these knowledge producers need to ask themselves. Is the knowledge groups imparting to the members, are they accessible for persons with disabilities or not? If the knowledge is not accessible, then why not? What can be done to change this? What are we doing to ensure that efforts are being made to co-design and co-deliver digital capacity building and leadership development programs for persons with disabilities, ensuring that their lived experience informs policymaking and also informs other areas such as AI, cybersecurity, data governance. The WSIS Plus 20 review presents a historic opportunity to move beyond tokenism and to enshrine digital accessibility at the heart of a truly inclusive information society. Without explicit commitments and concrete actions for persons with disabilities, and without the active leadership of people with lived experience of disabilities, the vision of universal, meaningful, and affordable access cannot be realized. As one of the coordinators of the IGF DCAD, I urge all stakeholders to ensure that accessibility and the inclusion of people with disabilities are not afterthoughts, but core priorities reflected throughout the WSIS 20 outcome documents and in the future mandate of the IGF. Only by doing so can we build a truly multi-stakeholder inclusive governance model that serves the needs of all people and sets in precedent for an equitable global digital policymaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judith. Our next speaker, that is Avri Doria. Please, Avri.
Thank you. My name is Avri Doria. I coordinate the Dynamic Coalition on Schools and Internet Governance, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. Though schools and internet governance is one of the ways of doing capacity building. And what I want to talk about is dynamic coalitions and capacity building. Capacity building, as we have seen in the documents, as we've seen in most every draft of an outcome document to do with governance issues, is always important. We're always looking for more capacity building. But like financing, we rarely talk about how one's going to do it. How do we build capacity building? The dynamic coalitions are indeed one of the prime examples of the way of building it. Now, capacity building isn't just about teaching, and that's, even though schools is the thing that I focus on, dynamic coalitions go way beyond that in capacity building, in that they actually develop much of the knowledge. In other words, a lot of it starts with the development of knowledge, the booklets, the webinars, all the research that they basically tackle technology and tackle issues that have not been dealt with yet, that we don't quite understand. And then they look at them and say, in some dynamic coalitions, they look at and say, how can we use this to solve our problem? In some dynamic coalitions, they say, oh, what kind of problems is this going to create for society? And how do we start thinking about that? In other ones, they're looking at what kind of opportunities does it create and how can we take advantage of them? Each one of those is an exercise in capacity building. It's building our capacity within the IGF environment as something that we've got. Something that we can then put out as outcomes, as output, and what have you. So when looking at dynamic coalitions, and we sometimes see them as on the side, they have been there almost as long as the IGF itself. That was one of the first parts. It was the bottom-up part of the IGF. The IGF was happening in a sort of multi-stakeholder, top-down way and was there, but there was really nothing that was building. And so the dynamic coalitions came along, they worked beside the IGF and its MAG, that part of now what we call the larger environment, and they're a very important part of it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that it started being included in the outcome document that we're hoping to see on WSIS Plus 20 in terms of being mentioned. It would be nice to be mentioned. They really are the fundamental tool. And I would argue one of the few fundamental tools that we have at the moment for doing capacity building, because it covers the full range of knowledge, of skills. And when you look at dynamic coalitions and look at the two words, the coalition is a multi-stakeholder notion for it to be a dynamic, but it's more than just the Tunis agenda pillars. It's people with different sets of skills. It's people from different geographies. It's people from different affinities. It brings together multi-stakeholders in more aspects than just what sector do you belong to. So that's important. It's dynamic in that it's constantly looking at new knowledge, at new problem areas, at new tasks that we need to put ourselves into. And so keeping that in mind about dynamic coalitions, hopefully it's visible how that really does constantly provide an engine for capacity building. So I'm really hoping it keeps its strong position in the outcome, and I'm hoping it gets a stronger position and gets more support, including from the people with financing. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. I think it has not been questioned by anyone that whether the dynamic coalition should be mentioned or not. So I think we can we can hope strongly that we will be mentioned. And I think that for the dynamic coalition, that will be very important. Now we have speaker Mark Carvell for the Internet Standards Security and Safety Coalition.
My name is Mark Carvell. I'm a senior policy advisor with the IS3C Dynamic Coalition. IS3C denotes Internet Standards for Safety and Security. I'm standing in for the coordinator of the coalition, Val Donatris. He had a conflicting commitment which he couldn't get out of. So unfortunately, he's not able to join us today. My background is I go all the way back to the WSIS summit in Tunis as a member of the UK government delegation there. And I've been involved in the IGF system in various ways, mainly as the UK government representative until 2019. I'm now doing consultancy work and working with the colleagues in the IS3C Dynamic Coalition. IS3C is a multi-stakeholder dynamic coalition. It brings together expert stakeholders from all regions across the world. And that's always been our ambition, to be fully diverse and geographically and gender-wise and so on, as an important characteristic of an effective dynamic coalition. The concept and action-oriented mission of this dynamic coalition was developed following research that VOUT did for the IGF back in 2018 to 2019 about the gaps in the deployment of internet security standards worldwide. Why do standards emerge from the developers, the organizations developing standards? Why are they not more effectively and more rapidly deployed and implemented across the world? It's a major failure, really, this pervasive gap in implementation of standards. Why was that happening? And following that report's recommendations, the proposal was that we set up a dynamic coalition to address this problem. And over the last 5 years, since we started back in 2020, we published a series of reports about security vulnerabilities in the Internet of Things, about why there isn't more coverage of cybersecurity in tertiary educational curricula and training programs. How can procurement practice by public and private sector organizations be used as a driver for deploying internet security standards and ensuring that the fundamentals of security by design follow through into procurement decisions? So there's been a lot of work, and it's a testimony, I think, to how dynamic coalitions can be focused on producing meaningful, tangible outcomes. And in the last, we've also published a list, I should add this as well, we've also published a list of the most important cybersecurity standards, so that there is a source of data that users, purchasers of equipment, network providers and so on can go to for ensuring that, well, is this piece of equipment, is this network service fitted with particular cybersecurity standards? So we've embarked on a new phase of work in the last 12 months in the area of post-quantum cryptography, PQC. We've published another report, it was back in July, entitled Socio-Political and Technical Impacts of IoT and PQC Policies, so linking across from post-quantum cryptography through to Internet of Things. There's a particular sort of bridging ambition for that report. And that project was partnered by the coalition with AFNIC, the FR domain name registry. And they are helping us now with the way ahead following the report with establishing working groups. And we're also looking for funding partners so that we can undertake much more research into this area. And what is the rationale for this? It hits on what's happening in emerging technologies that we heard about before from previous speakers. There's a huge amount of investment going on in quantum computing research. And the days are now ticking down to deployment of quantum technology. And this will have a massive impact on the digital environment. because the advent of quantum computing poses in particular a major threat to current cryptographic systems that protect privacy, ensure effective data governance, and so on. All this will need a bit of a rethink with the advent of quantum computing. So the challenge that we in this coalition are addressing is that the current encryption and internet standards that run the internet, like the DNS, BGP, and TLS, are vulnerable to quantum computing power. If these are broken, the internet standards are broken without quantum-resistant encryption in place, the results will be devastating and potentially lead to chaos across all sectors, education, health, defense, and whatever. It's a major evolution that we're coming up to again. So the window of opportunity to prepare for this transition to post-quantum is narrowing, and we are really seized of that urgency. And that's what we're doing in the coalition, and we will take forward following our first report earlier this year. I just want to make a final word. WSIS Plus 20 is a major turning point. The IGF, the continuation of the IGF. We believe that our coalition and many of the other coalitions, some of whom have spoken today, demonstrate how the IGF as a forum can focus in on particular challenges and produce valuable outcomes that can be picked up by governments, by leading actors in the internet ecosystem, the digital environment, and ordinary users, best practices. That's the essence of what a dynamic coalition that is focusing on the technical layer can help to achieve. I'll finish there. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Mark. And the last speaker of our inaugural round is Jutta. Jutta Kroll is my co-facilitator, and she, as I said, she deals with rights of children on the internet. Jutta, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Marcus, for giving me the floor, and thank you also for coming to this session. When WSIS took place 20 years ago, children's rights were not in the focus of the deliberations. Fortunately, this has changed over the years, eventually resulting in the General Comment number 25 on children's rights in the digital environment, which was adopted by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child in 2021. Attention was also shed to children by the endless engagement of the members of the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights, which was one of the first dynamic coalitions that was set up in Rio de Janeiro in 2007. Then it was called the Dynamic Coalition on Child Online Safety, and I will explain why we came then to children's rights to cover all the issues. Many things have changed since then. Now more than 6 billion people are using the internet, and 1/3 of them are children in the sense of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That means they are under the age of 18. Also, the technologies and devices have changed. They have become ubiquitous and mobile. And then also artificial intelligence is in the focus of deliberations on opportunities and challenges. But despite global cooperation, still the digital divide is not closed. And many people, also young people, remain unconnected. Where governments decide to restrict young people's access to social media, they, on the other hand, neglect children's rights to access to information and freedom of speech for the sake of protecting them from risks and from harm, which is fair enough. But we would need a balanced approach addressing risks and granting freedom rights. Children have the right to be heard in any process and decision that affects them. And of course, the digital environment is affecting them not only nowadays, but over the last 20 years in many ways. You've heard of a lot of the dynamic coalitions today, and there is strong cooperation also among the dynamic coalition. It's not that each dynamic coalition only pursues their own special interest, but as you have heard from Marco, who was speaking before me, safety and security standards. Of course, that is a matter that affects children as well. When we are talking about accessibility, that is also an issue that affects many children. When we talk about health issues, and freedom of speech, all things that are addressed by dynamic coalitions, it's also an issue that is dealt with in close cooperation of dynamic coalitions. Sometimes two of them, sometimes more than two of them, they are working in close cooperation. And last but not least, let me refer to something that Christopher Schubert said in the leadership panel before we had this session. He said the value of the Internet Governance Forum is the issues that affect people's lives. And that is what we need to take care of when we continue with the Internet Governance Forum. And as you may have already recognized, all these things that are addressed by dynamic coalitions are somehow affecting people's life, be it health, be it jobs, or be it accessibility for people with disabilities. So if we continue with that work in the dynamic coalitions, we have the right to be part of the Internet Governance Forum. And that's for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Ita. And I think this first round of speakers gave you a good impression of how broad the issues are the dynamic coalitions are dealing with, but they are dealing with them deeply. They go deep into the substance of issues. And several speakers pointed out that the dynamic coalitions stand ready to be here and help with the implementation of the Global Digital Compact and of the WSIS +20 outcome. And it seems as if we are finally going online with our Zoom, and you can actually then hear our remote participants also in the room. But I would like to open the floor, and our guests who are attending this session, would you have any question or comment? And I also invite the panelists to jump up on something and jump in and ask questions or make comments to what you heard from the other panelists. But can we hear, and who is breaking the ice?
Good afternoon. My name is the president delegation here. I work for the Brazilian Internet Student Committee in Brazil. It's very nice to be with you as well in this place. And thanks for the presentations and all the information about the dynamic coalitions, processes, and so on. Many topics that interest us in many senses. Schools of Internet Governance, typically we have also ones with Internet Governance. We have
what we're doing, and then government can really fine-tune its efforts better as it sees to be more inclusive. And so that's one of the things looking forward, as also as well as putting people on when they're creating panels, AI. And I know you have many champions of disability there, Judy Okai and others, but we need to start collecting the data, because if you don't have the data, how can we say how we just have anecdotal information?
Mark, you were cut short of it. Would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Marcus. I think it's been a remarkable session. I hope the audience has appreciated the scope and the commitment and the missions of the dynamic coalitions who've spoken here today. And I just want to add that I've seen the IGF evolve and progress over many years. As I said in my introduction earlier, I've been to almost every IGF, and I've seen the evolution from when it was first created. I wasn't actually in Athens, I was at the second one, and then onwards as a UK participant. I was really championing this amongst governments. Governments should be there in much more committed way to engage and seek out opportunities to partner with stakeholder groupings, including dynamic coalitions, where you've got pools of incredible expertise that governments can really tap into. So I hope with the successful renewal of hopefully a permanent mandate for the IGF, which integrates the intersessional activities, including those of the dynamic coalitions, in a truly meaningful way and in a two-way. We may, I hope, envisage a situation where there's a dialogue at the annual forum of the IGF saying this is a terrible step that's being taken, or this new technology is going to put everything up in the air. let's form a group, a dynamic coalition, to look at this and report back to us. So you get some kind of, a kind of systemic involvement of dynamic coalitions that responds to challenges that have been identified within the dialogue of the forum in a way that says, okay, we can take this forward and report back to you. What are the facts? Collect the relevant data, do the comparative analysis, and make those policy recommendations or devise a toolkit, and then present that at the subsequent annual IGF forum. I hope the vision will evolve in that way with respect to intersessional activities, in particular the dynamic coalitions. Thank you.
Now we have 10 minutes left. Tamado with that. Or is yeah.
Hi, so Stephen White from the International Federation of Library Associations. Also, a bit like our project from the International Federation of Library Associations, also with Dynamic Coalition on Public Access and Libraries. You took my initial question, and I mean, deep down a little bit more. And I think obviously one of the differences that's made by the declaration that's phased as is this more public recognition of dynamic coalitions in a document that goes beyond the IGF. I'm also conscious in a lot of what we're talking about, the dynamic coalitions are addressing topics that also go particularly IGF. There are discussions about health outside the IGF, about children's rights outside the IGF, about libraries outside the IGF. And so I'd be interested in hearing, what scope do you think there is, especially for those broader looking dynamic coalitions, to actually become a bridge to offer support in those other fora where some of these discussions are taking place, where there's actually a risk that the internet governance perspective is missing some of the time. And I was at the social summit. There was one session about WSIS, but the rest of the discussion about how do we make sure the internet supports social development, there's none of the sorts of input, none of the sorts of insights that we get within the IGF setting. So is there that scope for dynamic coalitions to form that bridge, at least to be there, to be present, to help make sure these discussions are joined up in the same way as it's supposed to happen with UNGIST, for example?
That is indeed a very interesting question. One issue that might be is a kind of institutional issue, as the ECs are very informable to up the loose coalition. The only sort of legitimacy, so to speak, is through the IGF. So there is the institutional challenge if they go outside the IGF framework, but it's definitely something worth considering. I can sense that you have your hand up.
Yes. Please, Roteas. One of the things that at least the Dynamic Coalition on Digital Economy has been doing is how do we shift from small number of large company to large number of small companies to create jobs. So internet-based technologies, we also created job maps for 2 sectors and we are building on board. The whole idea is the internet was formed as open net for everyone. That's the kind of DNA of internet. Our job is to see how do we create job maps that interactive companies create more jobs. And they will, if we have the right approach to that.
Thank you for that. And you also have something to add?
Yes, I think that so sometimes in the internet governance community, he got the feeling that everything is important that we are talking about. What he can to other contexts, to other conferences, tell them there is United Nations Internet Governance Rule. Many people don't know about that. So I do think that dynamic coalitions face each in their topical bubble, and they bring forward the idea of internet governance also to other communities. Like, for example, we did firstly in 2024 when the first global age assurance standard summit took place in Manchester. Many of the people there hadn't heard about the internet governance rule, but age assurance from the internet is a very important issue. So it went vice versa. We brought a topic to the summit, and from the summit we got
many contacts to governments as well as to companies, to industry working in this area, developing age assurance technologies, bringing that knowledge back to the internet governance. That's one way.
Thank you, Luther and Mark. You hand this up.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And I just wanted to follow up that proposal that was put forward, a very valuable one, I think, by noting that Rev 2 of the outcomes document does talk about strengthening secretariat support for intersessional IGF activities. And I think if this is accepted by member states as enhancing the sustainability of the IGF as a year-round forum that's going to be focused on specific issues and outcomes and impact, creating greater impact, that would include intersessional activities such as those conducted by dynamic coalitions, having the resource to engage in other fora, to engage with other partners, to seek linkages to those particular actors in the digital ecosystem who are going to be most impacted by what the IGF says. And the dynamic coalitions can help that process. But at the moment, of course, we don't have that kind of resource. But as I say, Rev 2, I was trying to look up the paragraph number, but towards the end, in the way forward, does, I think, indicate that the whole system of the IGF could be strengthened, and that includes the intersessional activities. Thank you.
Thank you. We're slowly but steadily running out of time, and I think we also lost most of our audience. Roman, you would like to say something?
I'm so happy that in spite of our technical troubles, we hear and see each other well. And thanks to Mark, who did it with the two platforms, the Zoom and Teams, and still delivered the very important contribution of ISCCC. And following what Mark just said, that if the member states would approve that clause about Secretariat strength and support for the DCs, we will be happy to do it. And we are doing it, and I am personally very proud of all of our achievements this year. I believe that we have expanded the horizons of Dynamic Coalition's reach. We have set up the new interactive way of communicating with the outer world outside of the IGF ecosystem through the series of the webinars. And I'm sure that altogether we will continue doing this fantastic work in the next year. So thank you very much. A special thanks to Marcus and Jutta as our co-facilitators, to my Secretariat colleagues, and specifically Anya and Celine, who joined us now and helped to make things great again. And thanks to all of you, dear DC members. So let's keep doing the great job.
Thank you, Roman. We are missing you. Thanks anyway for your support throughout. And one last 30-second statement by all the panelists. Let's start. Rajendra?
Yeah, let's strengthen the dynamic coalitions and let's address the real issues. Thank you. Very good.
Just to complement what I alluded to before the beginning, I think also one very recent initiative launched by the DC, the Dynamic Coalition on Emerging Technology, was on an initiative supporting the First Nation in the territory of Canada. We had a launch of an initiative to help them again to create a digital identity and ensure they have access to digital health. So again, another tangible demonstration of the broader scope of the Dynamic Coalitions. Thank you, Diva. Alfred?
Yeah, I think that dynamic coalitions have a really good opportunity to keep growing. I think that they shouldn't let themselves be too confined to what the Vox already says it is, but basically to keep pushing out and looking at the new frontiers for the government's ideas that we are promulgating in the IGF and expand the IGF's view of the world. Thanks.
Judy?
Yeah, so thanks so much for coming and listening to our panel. Yes, I also hopefully bring words that we will have with the inclusion of the Convention of Persons with Rights and Disabilities in the WSIS document will lead to more openness and more leadership opportunities for persons with disabilities, as well as more awareness.
out the issues. But thanks for guiding us.
Fractures. I think my last words would be the dynamic coalitions are ready to implement and hand over to you to conclude the session.
Thank you, Marcus. I would like to conclude this session also with thank yous to all of those who have contributed and listened to us, and let's strengthen our collaboration among the dynamic coalitions and within the internet governance ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamima.